This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. This is a follow-up to my previous video where I dissected the shaky future of Archewell Fugazi Public Charity and its sly rebranding, quietly slipping under the radar to fund and prop up censorship, all rebranded, of course, as protecting youth from online harms. If you want to truly grasp what's barreling towards Prince Harry here in America, you need to watch that first video. It briefly summarizes rapid moves Congress is already making against this censorship industrial complex. In it, I break down Senator Eric Schmidt's initial letter to Elon Musk, which exposes the full scope of what was inflicted on Americans during the Biden regime, and Harry and Meghan's unmistakable complicity in it. It also highlights the ongoing cover-up through their Fugazi Public Charity rebrand. On several occasions, I've pointed out how left-wing Democrats, globalist bureaucrats, and the deep state have been frantically strong-arming lawmakers to shove through 18 bills that shamelessly mimic the censorship frameworks of the EU, UK, and Australia, all designed to gut the First Amendment and strip Americans of their constitutional rights ahead of the 2026 midterms. The left right now is desperate to claw back power, and their biggest obstacle remains the one thing they can't control: what people say and the free flow of information. Now, with Senator Schmidt being a champion and a very large voice in defending free speech, real pressure is mounting on U.S. foreign policy and the State Department. Recommendations are piling up for sanctions, asset seizures, penalties, and legal protections for Americans. This second letter from Senator Schmidt, which I'll share portions of, reveals exactly how America intends to push back. If it succeeds, and it will if we keep raising hell, serious consequences for Prince Harry are inevitable. So dated on December 18, 2025, Senator Schmidt addresses this letter to Secretary Sarah B. Rogers, who is under Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. We're going to get into who Sarah is after we go through parts of this letter. I encourage you to stick with me because I promise you this will be a satisfying video. But before we go ahead and look at this, if you could do the kid a favor and hit that like button, as well as double check to make sure that you're still subscribed. As you know, YouTube is really funky with this channel. All right, let's go ahead and get into this. It says here, "Dear Under Secretary Rogers, I write today to express my grave concerns about the threats to American speech and sovereignty posed by an emergent international censorship regime. In recent weeks, the architects of this regime have launched a full-scale bid for control of American public discourse, seeking to impose hard-left ideological strictures on our nation from abroad. We must confront this campaign of foreign subversion with swift and decisive action. I therefore strongly encourage the State Department to impose sanctions and visa restrictions on the foreign individuals and entities involved in this assault on our freedom of speech. Foreign regulators are attempting to enforce radical new censorship laws against U.S.-based social media platforms like X. In doing so, they have levied an attack on our citizens' liberties by seeking to impose a censorship regime on Americans' ability to speak in the digital public square. These attacks pose a direct challenge to our sovereignty and independence as a nation." Senator Schmidt then repeats what he'd mentioned to Elon Musk about the DSA and what they're trying to do to him with this $140 million fine. He goes on to say, "I commend the actions the Trump administration has already taken in the face of these unprecedented attacks against our nation's sovereign political prerogatives, such as the visa restrictions and sanctions on the Brazilian government officials involved in efforts to censor American speech. I fully support these deliberations and encourage the State Department to impose additional sanctions on the foreign individuals, entities, and NGOs responsible for these attacks on free speech." The Missouri versus Biden lawsuit I filed as Attorney General of Missouri helped reveal how the Biden administration created a domestic censorship industrial complex to wield against Americans. Central to that censorship regime was the State Department, particularly the Global Engagement Center. Part of the State Department's model was to use the Global Engagement Center and a cabal of NGOs as proxies to coerce and pressure social media companies to censor Americans through both 1. Targeted takedowns of specific statements, and 2. Broader algorithmic censorship to artificially suppress speech the Biden administration and their NGO allies disfavored. And that is exactly what happened to me and many others who dared to criticize or challenge the narratives that Harry and Meghan were spewing out into the public domain in this psychological operation that they have been running on innocent people. Everything that they have been doing has been intentional to gaslight and cause chaos online in order to come back and say, oh, we need to put regulations. You have to ask the question, why was all this chaos happening? Well, the reason is because they can turn around now and say, yeah, we need more guardrails. It's all to push policy and regulation to curb speech. You know, I said this from the very beginning in 2021 that Harry was a foreign adversary here to undermine the First Amendment, and here we are. That's exactly what he and his bitch wife were doing. By working with these NGOs as cutouts, the State Department helped fund and build a vast censorship enterprise carefully crafted to censor American speech while simultaneously evading constitutional scrutiny. To ensure our government would no longer censor our fellow Americans, I successfully fought to defund the State Department's censorship apparatus and shutter the Global Engagement Center. Since President Trump returned to the White House, Secretary Rubio and the State Department have taken decisive action to systematically dismantle the U.S. censorship industrial complex. But just as the Biden administration's subtle and sophisticated censorship regime, which one federal judge likened to an Orwellian ministry of truth, began to end, countries around the globe took up the mantle by codifying and strengthening their own censorship regimes. Building on the Global Engagement Center's model, the European Union implemented the DSA, a law that imposes massive penalties on social media companies that refuse to censor speech disfavored by European bureaucrats. And just like the Global Engagement Center pioneered, one of the key mechanisms the DSA uses to enable censorship is empowering EU government-approved NGOs to flag content for removal and adjudicate which speech, including American speech, should be censored. Now, I would like for us to go all the way back to 2021 when we were being harassed by Bot Sentinel. It was those types of groups that they wanted in place, just like the CCDH, and we'll get to that group in a second. Senator Schmidt goes on to talk about the Online Safety Act in the UK and the human rights violations, as well as talking about Australia's laws that are being implemented that is essentially against American citizens' free speech. Now, if I was Prince Harry, I'd be really worried with this next part. In light of these recent foreign censorship attempts against Americans, I was pleased to see the State Department's recent decision to impose visa restrictions and sanctions against the Brazilian officials responsible for this censorship. Those visa restrictions and sanctions sent an important message to the world that the United States will not stand idly by while foreign governments try to extraterritorially suppress our citizens' right to free speech and censor the information we can see. Those actions were a welcome first step, but we need to do more. 3 tools the State Department should consider using to combat foreign censorship are the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act, as implemented by Executive Order 13818, and Sections 212A, 3C, and 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, otherwise known as the INA. The Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act and Executive Order 13818 provides powerful tools to punish and deter the global censorship industrial complex that menaces the freedoms of Americans. Those authorities permit the Secretary of State to sanction human rights abusers by freezing their U.S. assets, prohibiting all transactions with them, and blocking their travel to the United States. Yeah, I'm all for the United States government going in and seizing that Olive Garden castle in Montecito. But even more serious than seizing that $14.6 million monstrosity out in Montecito is the potential for seizing the Crown's assets here in the United States. Now, I've talked about this a few times over the years about the potential for dark money to have been flowing into Archwell via Harry and funding all these radical leftist groups that have been undermining the United States. If indeed it is discovered that money that is being injected into Archwell is coming from the pocket of Prince Harry somehow, or tied to the crown, King Charles is going to have a lot of problems on his hand. The likelihood of that happening, it depends. If the UK continues to keep pissing the United States off with provoking war with Russia, you better believe that the United States is not going to have any type of loyalty here. Sanctioning the global censorship industrial complex would not only send an important diplomatic message that the United States will not tolerate foreign censorship, but also forcefully deter and punish all the foreign individuals and entities who seek to impose it. For the past decade, the State Department has used Magnitsky Executive Order 13818 sanctions under administrations from both parties against foreigners in far-flung countries who attack the freedom of expression of their fellow countrymen. Now, however, we face a situation in which the targets in question are waging a direct assault on the liberties of not only their citizens, but also our own citizens right here on our own soil. That fact makes the case for sanctions all the more urgent. The fundamental principle of America First demands that we protect our citizens' fundamental rights from the threats they face from abroad, like coming from Prince Harry. The State Department should also consider imposing visa and travel restrictions against this global censorship regime's apparatchiks. For example, leading foreign censors, including EU DSA regulators, the Australian E-Safety Commissioner, Brazilian officials, and representatives from the UK's Ofcom, recently participated in a confab at Stanford University's Cyber Policy Center to discuss the state of compliance and enforcement with multi-jurisdictional regulations. In other words, they traveled to the United States to discuss how to force social media companies to censor Americans. It is well established that the federal government has the power to block the entry of individuals who seek to undermine the foundations of our society. Going forward, the State Department should consider blocking visas for similar conferences on U.S. soil under Sections 212A-3C and 212F of the INA. There is no reason to facilitate foreign censorship of U.S. citizens by granting these would-be tyrants entry into our country for coordination meetings. I also encourage the State Department to consider revoking the visas of foreign censors, such as Imran Ahmed, who is reportedly here on a visa. Ahmed is the former British Labour Party operative who founded the George Soros-funded censorship organization Center for Countering Digital Hate, otherwise known as the CCDH. Ahmed and CCDH have been involved in both the Biden administration's censorship regime and the burgeoning global censorship industrial complex. Yes, and this is who Harry and Meghan have been working with since 2020. For example, he and CCDH worked to censor U.S. media outlets, encourage the Biden administration to censor Americans, and promise to kill X because of its support for free speech. Given the United States' recent diplomatic efforts to combat global censorship and promote the freedom of speech and expression around the world, the continued presence of foreign censors like Ahmed in the country is detrimental to the United States and would have adverse consequences for its foreign policy. The State Department should consider revoking his visa and the visas of similar malign foreign actors like Prince Harry. The American people will not abide this brazen foreign censorship. Our Constitution and laws prohibit it. If the United States is to protect the freedoms that form the beating heart of our way of life, then we must fight back and prevent foreign governments from violating our sovereignty and eviscerating our freedom of speech by imposing their censorship laws on our citizens on our own soil. I look forward to working with you to protect Americans' free speech against foreign censorship. To that end, I request your response to the following questions to help inform my legislative process. Number 1, does the State Department have the statutory tools it needs to combat this foreign censorship threat, or are additional authorities needed? And number 2, are there any additional legislative solutions needed to help the United States combat the global censorship industrial complex threat to American free speech and sovereignty? Sincerely, Eric S. Schmidt, United States Senator. This is what really needs to happen. And at bare minimum, if you don't think that Harry is touchable, then James Holt certainly is fair game. He needs to go. He shouldn't have any type of visa status here for running that Fugazi charity. So now let's go back and talk about the woman that this letter is addressed to, Sarah B. Rogers, who is under Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy. She actually was just sworn in October of 2025 this year. Her biography states, Sarah B. Rogers was sworn in as the 11th Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy on October 10, 2025. Undersecretary Rogers joins the Trump administration following a career as a law firm partner and free speech activist. In 2024, she litigated a winning Supreme Court appeal under the First Amendment challenging the debanking of disfavored speakers by hostile regulators. She also spearheaded and supported challenges to social media censorship and the weaponization of law enforcement, including in connection with the successful appeal of the wrongful conviction of Douglas Mackey and the online censorship of Charlie Kirk. An expert on high-stakes advocacy inside and outside courtrooms, she has represented clients including the National Rifle Association, major tobacco manufacturers, and investors and executives in the artificial intelligence industry. The person who held this role prior was Elizabeth M. Allen, and she served under the Biden and Obama administrations, and her focus was completely the opposite, where she placed significant emphasis on countering foreign disinformation and information manipulation as a core national security priority, aka she was all in for censorship. So the choice in putting in Sarah B. Rogers in position to tackle this means that the Trump administration is very serious in protecting our God-given inalienable rights. And just as I said in the update that I gave about that joint status review on the records pertaining to Prince Harry, I wouldn't just give up and think that nothing is going to happen to these two assholes. I do believe something is going on. Like I said, I've been told to continue to keep doing what I'm doing. We just have to be patient. I can assure you that things are happening behind the scenes, but it's taking some time. Yeah, one of the things that's encouraging is seeing these two new resolutions introduced in Congress directly challenging the growing influence of European and British online censorship laws on the American people. As we see together, they really do signal a coordinated effort to push back against the creeping erosion and undermining of First Amendment freedoms by foreign entities and powers, like a Prince Harry, right? So what you're seeing on your screen here is that in the Senate, Senator Mike Lee introduced S. Resolution 567, declaring that any attempt by foreign entities to censor or penalize constitutionally protected speech of United States persons shall be opposed. This resolution frames freedom of expression as a defining principle of American identity. This resolution urges the Trump administration to ensure swift and firm rejoinders to any implementation of disapproved activities. Meanwhile, you have in the House now Representative Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey introduce H. Resolution 967, asserting that European laws and regulations unfairly and unreasonably burden American speech and innovation. This resolution targets not only the DSA, but also the UK's Online Safety Act and Digital Markets, Competition and Consumers Act, citing that political misuse of vague regulatory terms, warning that labels like misinformation and disinformation and hate speech are inevitably used by the powerful to censor critics and silence dissent. In this resolution, they are looking for the Trump administration to respond through diplomatic and economic channels like sanctions. So we're starting to see this momentum now finally picking up on taking action against these foreign entities. And, I am very hopeful that Prince Harry will be dealt with. What Prince Harry has been involved with is very serious, and I don't think people fully understand the gravity if they hadn't experienced it themselves during that period of time when so many of us were getting demonetized, deplatformed, and deliberately suppressed. Those that were in it between 2021 and the end of 2022, you were affected, whether you realize it or not. And that's what I will not let go or let rest, because that's what I'm fighting for. It's justice for those people who went through a lot of harm psychologically by these people, as well as impacted from a financial perspective. We look at people like Sue Smith, myself, Duchess of Narcissus, Daily Empress, Ashley from Danger Zone, Tumi Yuki, Sue Me, and many other Americans, not only on the YouTube platform, but also over on Twitter and Facebook. There are many more Americans that were affected. And, the reason why I'm only talking about Americans is because we have this protection. And it's why it's so important that we defend it at all costs, because the abuse that Yankee Wally, Trevor Colt, Celt Views, Murky Meg, according to Taz, all had gone through, nobody's going to be held accountable for that. That's why it's so important that we as Americans recognize that this fundamental, inalienable right should never be taken for granted, and that we need to defend it at all costs. I have faith that one way or another, justice is coming to those two in Montecito. Anyhow, what do you guys think? Definitely leave your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
Such a fraud.